on YouTube a little later. I posted the one, if you guys didn't see that, if you needed some updates on that. So to check that. Yes, Mike, fall is in the air. A lot of rain this weekend. Hopefully, these bucks are starting to get rid of all that velvet and starting to make things interesting. Jason, Kansas, we are kind of in the north central. So we go to Kearney, Nebraska, and then we go straight south a couple hours from there. So Hayes, north of Hayes, just northwest of Hayes, down into that area. Units 3, 4, I believe they are 7, right into that area. So looking forward to that, getting some really good deer already on camera out there and here. So got a couple patterns already figured out, and I'm hoping that next weekend that the one stays true. Unfortunately, we had to start some DNR crick work, and with that work happening, it's kind of messing up the pattern of the one deer that I really wanted to put my wife on next weekend. So I'm kind of letting it lay low, and I'll check cameras on Friday, the day before, and hopefully he's still there and doing what he needs to do so I can get in there on Saturday with her. But with that said, I see Jason, you're typing something, so I'll wait for that to come through, and then we will get started here. So okay. To be honest, I'm not quite sure where Hutchinson is, but obviously it must be someplace close to where we are. Phillipsburg, Stockton, Hayes, that whole line right in there is where we're at. But so anyway, I'm not sure. You can probably hear my dog walking around panting. He's been outside running. But we will get started here, guys, on patterning and hunting mature deer. So with that, we'll get started. Again, the companies that I work with, companies I trust. And again, if you guys have any questions on any of these companies, the clothing, the optics, anything like that, please, shoot me a message and we can figure it out. So, and I apologize for last week. I was going to hit a different button and I kind of wiped everybody out right after for questions. So tonight I'm hoping that doesn't happen. Otherwise you can shoot them to me on Facebook too anytime. But again, we'll go through these real quick, and we are going to get started here. So patterning mature deer. When I'm talking mature deer, again, I'm talking 4, 5, 6-year-old plus deer. However, if you don't have that type of age structure on your property, or your own, or where you're hunting, public land, whatever, you can go in there and pattern anything from a 1-year-old on up. It just seems like once they hit that 3, 4, 5, really 4, 5, and 6 and older, that their patterns change a lot and they get really difficult to pattern. So you really have to condense your scouting and know what you're doing, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. The 1 to 3-year-olds, the 1 and 2-year-olds you can pattern pretty well, but then that 3-year-old's the one that's difficult to pattern, because your 4 or 5-year-olds may be getting shot off or getting killed, dying of CWD, EHD, just get hit by a car. That 3-year-old's going to look for that new home and try to take that over. So he's kind of that teenage, trying to figure out his way, late teens, early 20s, trying to figure out where he wants to be and what he's doing. So, as you're watching that deer, and trying to figure that out, that 3-year-old's going to be your toughest. Okay. And so, yeah, you're in Sauk County there, and a 4-year-old, gets pretty tough in southern, where I'm at here in Iowa County. we do some pretty tight management, but there's other areas that don't. And again, once you get over that 4, so that 1-2-year-old, they're pretty easy because they're still kind of trying to find their way. It's that 3-year-old that starts getting difficult. So that deer truly, he can be a giant too at 3 years old. So how do we pattern them? Well, first you got to know your habitat. And as a land management guy, I set up the land for land management or for hunting purposes and growing big deer. So you have to know that habitat. You have to know how to get to your stands, how to get away from your stands, where those deer are bedding, where they're feeding, all those different things. You have to know where that is. You have to be able to identify your bucks. And I run a lot of trail cameras. And when I run these trail cameras, I run so many of those for that simple fact that I want to know that deer. I want to know where he is at what time of year and what he's doing. A lot of people think that, well, it's the antlers. The antlers stay the same year. A lot of times they don't. Something will happen, especially if they blow up. We had a 3-year-old this year blow up that took me forever to try to figure out what deer that was, because last year that deer was a 9-pointer and he was a 115-inch deer. He's a 145-inch 3-year-old this year that just blew up, and he's a 10-point, and it took forever. And how we finally figured out what that deer was is because of he's got a big cut in his ear and he's got a really weird throat patch. So that's what you really want to look for when you're looking to identify deer from year to year, or identify their patterns and where they're at. Not just antlers, but look at, the nose, look at any distinguishing features. Do they have a cut on their side? Is their tail a different color? Do they have a limp? Is there a knuckle that's goofy? Do they have a weird growth? Do they not have any white around their eyes, or do they have prominent white around their eyes? Just different distinguishing features like that. That's how you truly want to identify that deer. That's what those, your cameras are used for, is to identify those deer, as I said last week, so you can figure out exactly where they're at. And then you need to, after you've figured out your habitat, you've identified your bucks, you need to adapt to their breeding stages and their season stages. Okay, so their breeding, they're going to change a little bit compared to how their season stages work, compared to early season, pre-rut, rut, and post-rut. So everything changes a little bit in there. And so you have to be able to look at that and figure out how we're going to adapt. And that's, what we're going to cover through this. So your habitat, and next week I'll really get into this, but your food sources, your water, sanctuary, cover, these are things that you're looking for. As you look at the map there, the white, if I'm not sure if you know how to read topographical maps like that. Some people do very well and some don't. You guys might, but I'm going to assume that right now that you don't read them a lot. And so what you're looking at is white is going to be field. Your greens are going to be timber, and obviously your blues are going to be water sources or creeks or ponds, whatever's going through there. The other thing is you look at it and there's a knob in the middle where there's everything looks like it's falling off to the sides going down into valleys. The closer those little lines are, the steeper that is. So you have to look at, well, how are those deer truly getting to that field? And what is the food source on that field? Is it clover for early season? Is it a late season food source? What is that? You've got to know that property. Is the east side of the property, is that going to be something for late season because of the way they travel and where they're bedding, with south facing slopes or north facing slopes? So that's what I mean when you have to look at that and figure that out. Your water, if you own your own, you can put water on there. And if you don't figure out where those creek bottoms are, figure out where the highest points of water are. Your cover, obviously what you're looking for is anything in that green unless you're looking at that white could be a set-aside field. If it's a CRP field, is it a tall set-aside field? Is it short? When I look at property, I plan them two different ways. One, I want tall for winter bedding. I want short for your summer bedding, because they don't want to bed in that super tall stuff because it's too hot in the summer. So, that's a lot of times what you're looking for. And the best time is through the winter, when there's, that's when we do a lot of our land management work, is through the winter, because you can see everything that's there. You can see the depressions. You can see what kind of trees. You can see the down timber, everything through the woods. You can see the deer trails and what they're doing. So it's a great time, to learn your property, January through April, and get out there and figure it out. Then you'll figure out where they're bedding. You'll figure out where they're moving and what they're doing. So look for that, for their cover. Sanctuaries, guys, there's got to be a place, unless you're on public. And sometimes public land, there are sanctuaries. You just have to get away from everybody else and look at the maps like this and figure it out. And say, you know what, I want to work a little harder than the next guy and walk and put my time in and go back there. Chris Parrish, a very good friend of mine, he drew a Kansas tag, I think it was 4 years ago now, and found a bunch of walk-in. Well, he got in there and he was seeing a bunch of guys, and same thing. Those guys were only going so far. They didn't want to put in the time or the work. He went way back farther in and actually stayed overnight back there, figured things out. And the third day that he was back there, he killed a 193-inch mainframe 8-pointer that had a couple other, kickers and stuff off, but an absolute giant deer. So, you get through that. There's a sanctuary. He found that. He pushed himself back farther than everybody else. When you have your own land, you can produce your sanctuaries. They can be anywhere from 2 acres to 50 acres, 500 acres, depending on how much land you have. And again, next week, I'll really get into that. If you own land or you hunt somebody's property, that will let you do some work on it. So, push that hard and look for these 4 things to really understand what those deer are doing and where they're moving. And again, with that food source, what time of year. And so with that, we're going to kind of jump into, the rest of this, the meat and potato stuff. So, again, identifying your bucks. And, you're saying, Mike, that there's not a lot of 4-year-olds, but if you look at any bucks, how do you identify them? Again, use your trail cam photos to make a list. Cell cams are incredible when you're looking at sanctuaries or places that are very difficult to get to. I try to set all my cameras up so they're on routes that I can get to with either a 4-wheeler, I can get to with my tractor, or so when I'm doing work at the farm, I can get in and out and check those without having to walk very far, without disturbing things. If I'm driving through with my 4-wheeler or my tractor, if I see a big mature deer, or if I see any deer laying there, I can just drive right past it, and they'll just usually watch me drive by. If I'm walking, they're not going to stick around. Farm equipment doesn't bother them nearly as much as, you walking in person. But make a list. Make a list of all of them. And whether, your 4-year-old or 3-year-old is your shooter, or even a 2-year-old is your shooter, make a list of that deer and say, okay, these are my trophies. These are management deer. These are non-shooters, and these are great deer with potential. And with that said, and I've said it before, and you guys have heard me say it, we do a lot of management, but I'm also not that guy that's going to tell you, if you own land next to me, would I love to see you do the management program? Yes, but am I going to get frustrated if you shoot a little buck? Sure, because I'm putting a lot of time in. However, I'm not going to be that guy that goes over there and starts a fight with that guy or badmouths him or anything else, and I'm going to try to get him on the program somehow, easily. And if he does, great. If he doesn't, so be it. I don't pay his taxes on his property. I don't buy his tags. I don't take his kids or her kids or anybody that's there. So I truly don't have that right on their property to tell them what they can and cannot do. On my property, I can. And so on my property, this is what I'm truly looking for, is those shooters, my management deer. And there's a big falsification out there saying, one of the things that people say, well, it's a management deer, I want him off farm. We call them management deer here, but truly in the wild, there is no such thing, because in the wild, you cannot control the genetics. They roam too far, they go too far. It's almost impossible. I suppose if you had a big enough piece of land and enough hunters, you could do it. But for the majority, you're not going to be able to control and manage those deer and say, well, this thing's got a really miserable rack and it's never going to be anything. Well, we do that in the way, but the way we manage it is we look at it at the same age structures and say, okay, this deer's a 3-year-old that's a really, really good 3-year-old, but this deer here is a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old that really doesn't have any potential. So if somebody comes out, if we're taking young kids or we're taking somebody else who just wants meat, hey, you know what? Let them go out and shoot that. You can't live by that standard. It's got to be 150 or 160 inch deer, because genetically there's very few deer that ever make it to that 150, 160 in certain areas. It just doesn't happen. If you have large enough lands, yes, it does. But it's still very slim if you look at the numbers. So be careful in how you're managing that. You can call them whatever you want. But just know, truthfully, you're not ever going to really manage, a wild deer herd as far as getting that genetic out of there. But that's how we do it with what we consider our management deer. Say, okay, this deer is just genetically not as good as these other deer, so we're going to let these get shot and hope the other ones make it through. Our shooters, like I said, 5. If they hit 5 years old, I don't care what their rack looks like. They're automatically on the list at 5 years old. They can be a 115-inch deer at 5 years old. That deer's on the list to get shot. The non-shooters or the young deer with potential, what I really look at, and we usually only have a handful of those, and that's your 3-year-olds that are 140, 150-inch deer at 3 years old. We try and do our best to let that deer walk, because at 4 and 5, that deer is going to be an absolute giant. But there's very few of those deer that are out there. So every year, there's not a lot of shooters out there that we would, or non-shooters out there that we would consider that. There's always something, because you got to still have fun, guys. We've taken the fun away in hunting. We truly have over the years. And I didn't really notice it until I started doing seminars and having little kids and people coming up and telling me what was happening to them on their farms and different stuff. So this is a good way to bring fun back into it and say, hey, you know what? This deer, we can call it a management deer on our farm, and, let little John or Jimmy or whoever go out and shoot this deer, or, Samantha, if she wants to kill it, let them go kill it and have fun. And, bring that back into it and get people back excited about this sport and into it. So label those, but you're going to have a lot of pictures and create files. So what I tell people to do is get a small external hard drive that you can plug into your USB port. Don't keep all the pictures. Just get a few good ones that, show the distinguishing features on that deer. And then put them in a folder. 2020, this deer, and name it. This is Pretty Boy. This is Henry. This is Frank. This is whoever. We had one named Goofy. We've had all kinds of forks, all kinds of things you can come up with. The one that's in the background right there, there's a tree stand in the background there, on the bottom picture. There's a tree stand in the background. I actually was in Kansas that day. I came back. I saw that 2 days later. I sat that stand. I had that same deer come back into that pond 2 days later with a cameraman, and I passed that deer We called him Tiny because he had two little short sixes way out here, fives, I guess, to make him a 12, and then he had a couple kickers. So he's actually 14, and he came in and his entire left beam was snapped off right above the brow. So I let him go, hoping that he'd make it, and he did make it. And the following year, I was a full draw 7 times on that deer. Unfortunately, things just didn't work out. He was chasing does, or he was behind something. I didn't have a good shot that I felt comfortable. And rifle season, my neighbor's son shot him right across the fence from where I was, which was fine because, you know, when I talked to them, I said, you know, this is where we really need to sit, my neighbor and myself, because this is where this deer's home range is now. And I learned that through these specific patterns and through my cameras. And as these deer get older, guys, what you'll see is that pattern gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and it shrinks. And so go back and, like I said, look at that card, put those in, put them in a file from year to year to year. That way, just like I said last week, you can look at that and say, okay, during this time frame, this deer is here. I have some deer this year that I'm still waiting for that I know made it because they were still on my farm the end of January. They disappeared the first part of February. They're not back yet. I looked because I was really nervous, and I looked back at all my pictures from the last 2 years, and they usually don't show up until September 15th to October 1st. So I'm still holding out hope that those deer, because they're a couple of the best deer I got on the farm, I'm holding out hopes that those deer will still show up. And I learned that, again, through cataloging these deer and the files that we had. So make sure you do that. Now we're, you know, you've got them cataloged. You figured out, okay, this is the deer that I want to kill, whether it's your 1-year-old, 2-year-old, whatever. If it's a 5-year-old, you know, you say, this is the deer that I want to kill. He's on this specific pattern. I've watched him for the last 3 years on this pattern. I know this deer. The other thing with naming the deer, to jump back real quick, the other thing with naming a deer is it's so much easier, because what you have to do is you have to really, and I guess you could say intimate, but that's kind of a goofy word to use for it, with that deer, to figure out with the images of that deer, because you have to figure out exactly what that deer or who that deer is. So you need to study that deer. So I guess that's the best thing, is you really need to study it and try to figure out exactly what deer that is on your property. Because when you're studying that deer and looking at it for a long period of time, you know then what those antler shapes are, what that deer is doing. So if you're sitting there and all of a sudden this deer shows up and you look at it and go, hey, that's my 5-year-old deer, you will know like instantly. You'll know because you've named it and you know that right away. If you don't, what happens is all of a sudden this deer shows up and you're like, I don't know, that looks like one of the deer I had on camera. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. You shoot it and you walk up to it and go, oh, that's not the one I wanted to shoot. It happens to all of us. You know, and you pick the pieces up and you move on. But that's what you really need to do when you're doing that. So, Dennis, I'm not sure if you caught that real quick. Guys, I'm going to jump back one slide real quick just so he can see that. Identifying these, you know, make your list. Make your shooters, your trophy, your management deer, your non-shooters, and your young deer with potential. You know, your management deer, like I said, you can't really manage a wild herd, but it actually makes us feel better when we shoot that deer and go, yeah, that was a management buck off my property. It's just terminology, guys. That's all it is. So now back to this. And again, the first seminar is live on my YouTube channel. The second one I will post tomorrow morning. And then next week, after that seminar, I will post this one and then so forth. So they'll all be coming up live on there pretty soon. So let's get into, now we've got them figured out what deer you're looking. So now I want to hunt them. That's the main thing, right? That's why we're trying to pattern these deer. We're trying to figure out what deer are out there. So here in Wisconsin, you really want to look at your season opening to mid-October. Okay, that's going to be what I consider your early season patterns and what that deer is doing and how they stay pretty consistent. They really heavily concentrate on food at this time of year. Why? The fawns, are still trying to put as much weight on as they can. The does are out there with them. They're still trying to put weight on, because as that doe gets older, just like those bucks, they understand that, now September comes around, that moon phase starts getting, or that moon rise and set gets a little shorter and a little shorter. That's what triggers the rut, guys. I'll talk about that when we get to the rut, but that's what triggers it. I hear all kinds of stories, and we'll touch on that, but that's not what it is. So early season like this, they're trying to put that weight on. That's what they're truly concentrating on. They're going to concentrate if you're out west. And Mike, I think it was Mike. Maybe it was, I'd have to look here. Hold on here, guys. I'm trying to see if it was Mike, if you were the one from Kansas. Yes. So with Kansas, Milo is huge. A lot of people really focus on that Milo. All right. Here it works well. You just plant it at a different time. Alfalfa, clovers, bean leaves, they're huge at this time of year. Clover has a lot of tonnage in it. Okay. So when you plant a clover, make sure you plant some type of mix. Alfalfa, red clovers, white clovers. We could go on all night. There's like 20 different clovers, but make sure there's a couple different clovers in there. And the reason you want, instead of just putting out a white clover or a red clover, berseem clover, anything like that, what happens is they all mature at a different date. It may be 2 or 3 days difference. It might be a week different, but they mature a little bit different, so they taste different. So that way your clover fields don't get overgrazed. That's why a lot of them don't get mauled down, and you ever go out there and you'll see one part is a little bit lower than a different part. That's because that's probably got a higher concentration of a different type of clover. So concentrate on these in that early season pattern. Look at these for trying to hunt that, okay? The beans, right now, they're starting to turn yellow down here. I'm not sure about, in the northern part, but here in the southern part of Wisconsin, we're starting to see a lot of yellow leaves turning. So I've been looking at cameras. I've been out driving, looking at deer, and man, these bean fields are just starting to disappear with deer. I mean, they're starting to get off of the fields and move away from them. Now they're moving, they're in that corn on the silk, but that silk is starting to dry up right now too. So they'll start moving back out of that corn. And that's why you want to have that alfalfa and that clover, especially in the early season. Everybody concentrates on beans. If you're going to do beans, guys, and you're doing it as a food plot, plant it about 2 to 3 weeks later than the farmers are planting it. That way they'll stay green through that first week or two of season, okay? Rub lines. Rub lines right now are a great place to start patterning deer, looking at deer for this time of year. A way to kind of figure out what that rub line is. So if you're on the edge of a field and you see those going in, on each tree, so if there's one here and then one here, and they're going away from the field down into the woods, that's the way he's moving, going back to his bedding area. So that's where he's coming off that field, going to the bedding area, whether it's morning or night. That's why you got to get a camera on those rub lines and figure, okay, is it morning or night that he's coming off of that? Usually that's a morning. He's coming off of that field in the morning, heading back down. Where you see that rub line coming out to that field is usually how he's getting out there at night. And he wants to concentrate on that food source in the evening or the night. So that will be the other side of those trees, walking out into that food source, or walking to a water source, or just down a trail. If you know where their bedding is, what side is that? Is it coming to or from their bedding? Okay. If it's going to their bedding, it's probably a morning trail. If it's coming from their bedding areas, it's going to be a night trail heading to food or water somewhere. So early season like that, you can really start hitting those rub lines and figure those out. Your community scrapes. You can get those, right now there's a few in there, but a lot of does are on those. I checked the other day and we do have a lot of does because right now they're trying to get rid of that velvet. So as they're trying to get rid of that velvet, they're creating the rubs and not concentrating on that. Once that velvet disappears, probably the end of September here, the 1st of October, you'll see them hit those community scrapes again for a little bit, and then they'll disappear. Usually from about the 6th of October to the 10th or 11th, just before that 4, 5, 6 day October lull that they call a lull that really doesn't happen, that's when you concentrate on those, because before they go into that little lull, which we're going to talk about here soon, they're really trying to figure out what does are in the area and what bucks are. So they're going to get real hot on those community scrapes for that, 3 to 7 days in there. So really concentrate on that area once you get into, that first part of October on those rub lines in September, that community scrape, that first part of October, and food source the whole time through, especially in the evening. I don't hunt a lot of food sources early season like this in the mornings because I'm too afraid of busting my deer. And the thing is with mature deer, you can bust them once, you bust them twice, you may never see that deer again. He may move and not too far. Which brings me to, how do I get off those fields at night? Because then I want to hunt that at night, right? I want to get around the bedding areas and hunt that at night. So in the mornings, back to that, I'm hunting just off those fields in those areas on those rub lines where he's going back to his bedding area somewhere. In the afternoon, again, I'll get on that field. The problem is then a lot of deer concentrate on that. And I've heard this so many times. People say, well, how do you get off that field then without blowing those deer off there and those big deer or educating them? I always carry a coyote call with me. Always. Take my rope too if I have to. And I have an extra rope on the backside of the tree. The reason is if I carry a backpack with me, and I will tie that to that rope if I have deer out there. As it gets really dark and I know those deer are looking the other way, I will let that backpack slowly down onto the ground, check with my binoculars to make sure that their heads are down eating or whatever, not looking at me, and then I will start coyote howling. And then I will bounce that bag up and down so it sounds like I'm a coyote running in the woods right behind the stand or through that area. Sometimes you'll get a doe to come over and look at it, but she doesn't know what it is, and she's concentrated on that ground and may see that backpack and freak out from that, but she doesn't see you. It gives you a 15 to 20 minute window that they're going to bust off that field. You pack your stuff and you go. And when I hit that field, I either hit the edges of it or I hunker over halfway and then I try to slide across that field. And I've watched it on camera time after time where if I don't do that with a coyote call and I walk across that field, it may be 3, 4, 5 days before I see a deer back on that field, a decent deer. If I do it this way, I've seen it where within 20 minutes, those deer are right back on that field. Okay, so that's how I get off of these fields in the evening. And that's at all times, especially early season, because they're so concentrated on that food source, okay? October lull. Like I said, I don't believe in an October lull. The reason I don't believe in an October lull is because I've killed a lot of deer and big deer during that October lull. A couple years ago, I killed a really good deer, 164-inch deer during the October lull, and I can tell you how here. You look at the mid to late October, and what I'm talking late October, guys, I'm talking up to the 18th, 20th. Once you hit that 18th, 20th of October, depending on moon phases and stuff, that is, for me, I hit the 20th and it's go time. Sometimes as early, last year, I think it was as early as the 16th, my cameras really started picking up. So by the 17th of October, it was go time. And when I mean go time, I'm talking hours and hours and hours and hours in the stand, as many as you can put in the right stands. Okay, as I said in the last seminar. But that mid to late October, you're going to look at what's happening with these deer, because it seems like no matter what, our cameras get real quiet. The deer disappear off of food sources. They just aren't there anymore. And I wish I could see you guys, because I'd say, do you tend to agree with me? And most people would shake their head and say, yes, they tend to agree with me. If you don't, please type in the message and say, I don't agree with you. But it happens that a lot of these deer just disappear. Except for your small bucks, you know, that 1 and 2 year old, they're still running around, but it seems like your big deer kind of disappear. And why? They're your oldest deer, and what they're doing is they're conserving energy. They know, because they've been here for a couple years, they know that, you know what, this day is getting shorter, this day is getting shorter, things are about to happen, so I need to conserve as much energy as possible. So they have shorter travel routes to and from your food sources. A lot of times it's your highest protein food source. So if you have real high protein stuff planted in your food plots, you still have a chance of that deer if he's bedding close. The problem is the leaves are starting to fall, the woods are starting to open up. So now it gets harder and harder to sneak into that area without that deer seeing you bedded right off the edge of your field. Okay. So what I try to do is I try to sneak in closer. And again, in the off season, December, through April, figure out, how do I get to that spot? How do I get to that source, right? Without busting deer out of their beds, without doing things. Where are the most acorns? What is the highest protein that we have? Is it, you know, what types of nuts are on the property? Apples, you know, what is it? And I get as close as I can to that. And that 164-inch deer. So what was with that is I was watching that deer, and I watched him for years. I called him Sweeper, and that deer was always there. And I'm like, man, I don't understand where this deer disappeared to. And every year he would disappear. I'm like, he's got to be bedding in this big timber stand area that I did, and he's just not showing himself. So one morning I got up really early. I snuck in there. I got into that area. I got into that little area off of that in an acorn patch. And after the sun come up, I was sitting there, and probably 45 minutes to an hour later, I looked over there and I caught a glimpse of something, a little glimmer, pulled up my binos and looked, and it was a tine from him laying there. So I had watched. He would get up, he'd move, he'd eat acorns around him, then he'd lay back down. Happened the entire day, okay, from sunup until about 35 minutes before dark. He finally had moved his way close enough to me and got close enough to me. Excuse my dog in the background. That's him. Just came in from out running. But as we got closer to this bed, or this deer, he got closer and closer, moving his way up that ridge to me, to the other food source, which was within 150 yards of him all day long. So this deer finally moved maybe 80 yards, 90 yards to get within range of where I was, because I was in between those food sources and bedding on that high protein area. And I shot him with 15 minutes left of the day. And I had to sit all day long to make that deer move that far. There were times I was very tempted to make a stupid shot and try a stupid shot, but I made it work. Some people, and I will address this, have asked the question, didn't you have to pee while you were in your tree? Yes. Do I get very nervous about that? Absolutely not. I am one of those guys that, because of certain diets, certain things, I don't worry about it, and I will pee right out of my tree stand. If you are on antibiotics, if you are on certain blood thinning drugs, different things that have a potent smell to them, then I don't recommend it. But if you're on a normal diet, then you shouldn't have a problem with doing that. And messing up your deer. Okay, so look for those bedding areas as close to those oak stands as possible. That's what you want to concentrate on for those 5 or 6 days during that October lull. If you don't have those areas and you can't access those areas, then probably best to just say, you know what, I'm not going to hunt this. Okay, I'm going to take these days off and I'm not going to hunt it. So then we get into the fun times of the year, guys. This is the pre-rut. I absolutely love the pre-rut way more than the rut itself. And I can, elaborate why here shortly, but this is the time frame that I'll get into with the deer and the length of day. So prior to this, you get into that end of October, and I've heard it before. You have a cold front come through October 15th. You look out in the field, and there's a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old that's chasing this doe around all over the place. I always have guys call me, man, the rut's going to be early this year. They're chasing that. Well, if your deer numbers are completely way out of whack, it's possible. I've seen very early fawns and I've seen very late fawns. If your deer numbers are somewhat where they should be, the true rut is triggered. You're always going to have that 1 or 2%, but that true 95 to 98% are going to be bred that first part of November. Leading up to that is the length of days where they get so short. That's what triggers the rut. Okay, as the daylight gets shorter and shorter and shorter, that's what builds their testosterone and makes them go into rut. That's why they want to check these does to see if they're in yet. If you all of a sudden have a doe with fawns every night, the end of October, and then you get into November 3rd, 4th, and now all you have coming back to your field are those fawns, guess what? She's ready. And you know what's on, because then what's happening is he pushed her. He took mom off, secluded her somewhere until she's ready to be bred. He'll breed her and then cut her loose and come back. So watch that. And I've had that happen more than once where all of a sudden, that doe's out there, or the fawns are here and the doe's gone. It could be 2 days before we see that buck running through here again, or he might be 2 miles away. That's why, getting back to this pre-rut pattern, I really like the pre-rut. That doesn't happen as much. The bucks will be where the does are at this time. They will be constantly checking those does to see if they're ready, to see if they need to push them off those fawns. And that's what they're doing. They're trying to push those fawns away. They're trying to separate them. And they do that from the beginning of season on, because once they get separated and get that fawn to quit nursing, that gets her to go back into heat. And so that's why those bucks keep pushing if they have fawns, and keep pushing and pushing and pushing. Right now you'll see it where that buck's out there, a younger buck with those, a doe and a couple of fawns out there, and you see that doe is up there defending them, and she's on her hind legs kicking, and he's running around crazy trying to push them. That's what's happening. It doesn't work very well for him, but that's what he's trying to do. So they're going to be where those does are, where that food is, like we talked about earlier. They're staging areas right now. So where they're coming out into these fields, where that funnel leading to that field from their bedding area, this is their staging area. So it could be 50 yards off the field to 100 yards. If it's clear enough, it could be 100 yards. But they want to sit there and they want to stage and watch that field to look for other deer onto that field. Once they see them, all of a sudden things are going to happen. And I'm sure you guys have seen it where there's does out on a field and they're looking around, and you're like, there's got to be something here. There's got to be something here. And all of a sudden, 15 minutes later, 1 or 2 or 3 different bucks show up and you're like, I wonder where they've been. They've been sitting back in those staging areas. So if it's too dark when those bucks are coming out, figure out where those staging areas are and move your stands back into there and get off that field during this time. The other thing is, at this time of year, deer respond to calling. So it'll create a lot of options and a lot of opportunities for you. You can use challenge grunts. You can use tending grunts. You can use estrus with tending grunts. You can use social grunts. You can use snort wheezes. There's so many different calls that you can use during this time frame that I think would be very beneficial to everybody. I'm actually going to do a podcast probably either tomorrow or next Tuesday with Bruce Hutchin on doing actually the deer calling and creating that. And may even possibly, if things go well, do that here, before a couple weeks, just before we get into this time of year, into that October. So look at Facebook and see if I'm going to do that. But this creates a lot of opportunity during that time frame to look at during that pre-rut. This is the fun time because you can throw that kitchen sink at them and you can hunt multiple different areas and not really mess them up. Because they're getting ready to split and find other hot does anyway. So this is where if you're going to put pressure on them and you're going to try to break the rules and do something stupid, this is the time frame. That October 31st, November 15th, give or take a few days on either side. Okay? Usually I like to, I put these as a date because this is kind of nationwide. Here in Wisconsin, I like to say, November 8th, 10th on the backside, and November 20 to 25th on the front side. But Halloween is always that trigger date for me. You will find me in a tree on Halloween no matter what. Except for 2018 when I broke my back. Other than that, you will find me. And I'm sure it was very difficult for my wife to keep me out of the woods that day. But these are the things you want to concentrate on during that. The rut patterns, guys, it's tough. There's really, if you want to call them rut patterns, here that November 10th up until rifle season. Once rifle season starts, your rut patterns are gone. If you don't rifle hunt a lot there and have that, there's also, that rut, if you have enough deer, that'll linger. We get down south into Kansas, Oklahoma, those areas, their rut runs through the end of that. South Dakota runs. We don't even leave for South Dakota to hit the end of their rut. I think this year we're leaving like the 28th of November. So, but here in Wisconsin, that 10th to rifle season, your best times to hunt, guys, are 10 o'clock in the morning to 2 p.m. If you look at every record book out there, I can tell you a lot of the big deer we've killed, a lot of big deer my friends have killed. It's just a very, very difficult time to hunt because it's boring. You're not going to see a lot of deer. You're not going to see a lot of action. But when it happens, it's usually going to be a good deer pushing a doe, or it's going to be a good deer trying to get from point A to point B because it left a doe and it's trying to find more. So they're going to be running. So you really need to get into those staging areas, like I said, travel corridors and funnels. These two, so what I like to do during this rut pattern, if I have to, is in the mornings, I will hunt a different area, whether it's just off of a food source, whether it's at staging to catch them on the way back. Then I will move. It might only be 200 yards, but I will move to that top of a ridge, or I will move to that funnel, wherever those deer, I'm catching those moving through there on those patterns in my cameras. So that's where I want to go to during that middle of the day and then back out. So the other thing is, guys, remember, and girls, remember that you need to focus on not only where I'm going to hunt at that time of year during that December through April, but also look at, all right, when it comes rut, I want to hunt here in the mornings, but I want to hunt that staging area or that travel corridor during the middle of the day. How do I get from point A to point B without busting a bunch of stuff? And then how do I get from point A or point B back to point A to hunt that in an evening if I want to? So plan that stuff out and get strategic with it one way or another. And the big thing during the rut, guys, is water. There's a lot of guys that overlook water. And I know Dennis, we've talked a million times. We set up a great water hole on Dennis's place. The problem is it's pines and it sits on this ridge. It looked great in person, it looked great on paper. Everything looked good until the winds kind of messed a few things up in there. I know that I think they've shot some does, some different deer off there, but they're very productive. They're very effective, but sometimes they can be difficult to hunt where they are. So then you have to look at that and say, okay, where is the funnel or the travel corridor going to and from that water to hunt that during the rut? Because during the rut, he's running so much, he needs that water. He needs to drink as much possible water as he can during that. And a lot of times that is in the middle of the day that he's going to go and drink that. So focus on that. Next week, I'll get more into how to build water and what you're looking for there. But if you have a water source, and if you can put it, you try to get that water source high, just because of the winds and stuff. Some places you can't because of where the neighbors' properties are, so you put it a little lower and hope. I do have a few ideas that I will probably get a hold of Dennis, soon, that I'm trying to figure out where that is and how to change that. And I might have a couple different ideas, whether they work or not, don't know, but you don't know until you try. So again, water, guys, really look at that in that 10 to 2. A lot of times we're gone at that time of day, but focus on that and your success will go way up during that time frame, especially on older, more mature deer. And you'll get a lot of deer from out of the area that I call bonus bucks, because during this time frame, this is when I lose my deer. This is when I lose, a lot of my good deer that will go a half mile, will go 40 acres, might go 2 miles. The thing is you're going to now get new bucks coming in from different areas that might be 2 miles away, going through there, but they're not going to be there morning and night. They're going to be there in the middle of the day because they were where they wanted to be early in the morning or night. So they're going to be traveling that, hitting those corridors during the middle of the day, out looking for that hot doe. So concentrate on that during this time frame. Late season patterns, right after rifle season's over, until close, really start focusing on that winter food sources. Now you're back to that milo or sorghum, either one they call it, brassicas, your winter wheat, winter rye, or remaining corn if you've left that up. Alfalfa too, there's certain alfalfas that'll stay cold till about 10 degrees. I've watched deer actually pick through my clover fields where I have clover alfalfa mixes and eat the alfalfa because the clover has gone dormant by then from the cold and snow. But they will come in and eat that. But really look at those brassicas, because they're eating as soon as that season's over, even just before, when the rut starts winding down, they try to eat as much of that green as they can, that tonnage. And I hear people all the time say, well, they aren't eating my bulbs. I don't like my bulbs. They don't. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not a big, if they don't eat your bulbs, I don't care, because that's a lot of sugar. That helps later on in the year to get them through the rest of the winter with the way their stomachs digest. But they need all that green tonnage, and they need the protein from the beans. They need the protein is what they're looking at to put that weight back on before that hard winter. So that's what you're really concentrating on, is those food sources. You can see on that bottom picture down there, those deer that are out there, there's corn, leftover corn. On the far side, there's some sorghum over there. In between all that was beans and brassicas. So what they're digging through, you can see the stubble on the top picture of some of the beans and the corn. The rest of it is all brassicas in there. So what I like to do is go in, plant either my corn, my beans, whatever I'm going to plant, sorghum, and then go back through in August or the end of July, mid-July, and walk through there and overseed everything with brassicas. That way you're giving them that entire smorgasbord, and off to the side of that, I like to have my clover. Again, next week, I'll really touch base on that stuff. So late season patterns, that's really what you want to touch on and look for and concentrate on those. Again, they're going to be bedded very close to those. So figure out how you're going to get to and from those carry coyote calls, carry different things so you can get out of there without messing it up for the rest of the year. So these are some of, we'll wind down here for a little bit. So if you have any questions, you want to start typing in there, you can, as I kind of wind down on this. This is one of my clients around Wisconsin Dells, and early season buck. You can see how short he still was, and short-haired he was. But this deer here, he had seen for a couple years, and finally focused on, he'd been focusing in the wrong places, and where should I hunt? And he called me, and after we set everything up, he says, I'm getting all these pictures, but I'm still not killing anything. And so I asked him where he was hunting, and he said, well, this is where I'm hunting on these ridges. And I said, you got to get off there this early in the year, where are your pictures showing you? And he told me, and I said, you got to hunt those. And he's like, you sure? And I said, yeah, get in there and hunt it. And the third day of season, he ended up shooting this deer, one of his best deer that he killed. So, early season, focus on that stuff. This deer here, I moved this deer out into this field. I actually shot this deer just below this. This is Sweeper that I killed and had to wait for. But for photo sake, it was a lot easier. You can see that was a brassica field and clover mix. You can see how most of the brassicas from the does had already started eating that. He, however, was out there early and then left, and was from where this picture is taken straight behind me down off to the right of the photo. It drops down kind of into a little acorn thicket, and then there's a little ridge that they bed on back in there that I've done a bunch of timber stand improvement on, and that's where he was, and that's where he came out of, moving to this field at night, which was, like I said, 150 yards maximum from where he was staying. So, concentrate on those at those different times of years. My dad's, this is a great story that I got to share with you, just because it's such a cool story. Is my dad always wanted to shoot a really good deer, and this deer, he could never, something would always happen, something wasn't right. Dad's not the greatest at scent control. Dad's, he grew up in a different era, and this deer was showing up all the time. And I said, Dad, I've got like a 140-inch deer, gross. It's a 4-year-old deer that if you want to shoot him, I'd love to have you shoot him. He says, where is he? And so I told him where he's at. Oh, he sat there, and he was on a food source, and that would have been like the 16th of October, I guess. No, I take that back. Would have been earlier than that in October when they were still on the early food sources, and he missed him. And he completely freaked out on me and this and that. So I said, don't worry about it. The deer showed back up on the same field a couple weeks later with some does. So I said, all right, the wind was wrong. And that's the thing, guys. If the winds are wrong, don't hunt them. The winds were wrong. I put him in on a pond. And I said, Dad, it's really hot today. Why don't you sit that pond? If that buck is there, he's going to push these does to that pond. So a little while later, I get a text, and he says, there's does up on the field up top. I can see him up there, and that buck just showed up, and he's with him. He's not coming down here. I said, well, do you have your grunt call, or do you have any calls with you? You call to him. I grunted at him. He didn't do anything. I said, do a challenge grunt. This is how you do a challenge grunt. Do this. So he did, and I said, what happened? He pushed the does off the field. I said, okay, good, because they're running. I said, if they're running and getting hot like that, he's going to come in for water. It's the only water around there. Stay there. Okay, pretty soon I get another text. He's not coming. I know he's not coming. Blah, 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 and on. And I said, listen, negative Nelly, it's just relax, and we got a lot of night left. Next text I get from him is, hurry up and get over here. I got him and I'm really clicking. I'm clicking, and I'm like, okay. So my dad had open heart surgery years and years ago, and he has an artificial heart valve. And when he tells me he's clicking, that means that he's super excited, and honestly, guys, you can actually hear that valve clicking in there when he gets excited. And it's called a toilet seat valve, and it does. It sounds just like, it's clicking, and I'm like, oh boy. And So I'm trying to calm him down as I get over there and finally get over there. Well, he put a great shot on it and ended up shooting that deer. But that was, again, knowing their patterns, just like we've talked about all night, knowing that pattern and what that deer is going to do and where he's going to go. And I knew because of pictures from the past, I knew from pictures of that year and what the weather was doing. It's hot. He's going to have to drink. So focus on that stuff. Learn from those. Learn from your cameras and learn those patterns, okay? This is one of my neighbors. Same thing. Water source. That deer came into a water source during the rut, high on a ridge like this, and middle of the day. He shot that deer at 1:30 in the afternoon. That deer come in, looking for does, just searching, stopped at the water hole, gave him a 15-yard shot, and the rest was history. So great deer. I knew that deer. I had a lot of history with him. So did my neighbor. We get along great, and I was super happy for him. I actually helped him drag that deer and took pictures of it for him. So, again, so look at what time of year that you're looking at for that, okay? And with that all said, this might shrink down because I think I had a question here. And next week, remember, I'm going to be doing the 5 land management must-haves. So, do I notice older class bucks disappearing right before they shed their velvet? Last 7 to 10 days. Yes. Great question, and they do. They will. All my deer, all my big deer, everything I had have disappeared because they are changing that pattern. They're hitting those rub lines now. They're changing a little pattern. Food sources are changing. And see, that's the biggest thing that a lot of guys don't put that 2 and 2 together with. Yes, their hormones are going up as they're rubbing that off, but also at the same time, the food source is changing in most of this area. As that velvet hardens, so do the beans. The bean leaves start turning yellow. The corn starts, the silk starts drying up on the corn. So there's a lot of changes going on. So what they do is those deer are going to move, see if they can find a different food source, but they're also going to be rubbing those, and that takes a lot of energy to rub that off, plus with all the blood and stuff on there, so it tires them out. So they just go in there, they rub that, they lay low, look for a different food source that they're trying to find, as that clover, alfalfa, different things at this time. So, and now that's 7 to 10 days, there's still a lot of bucks starting to shed right now, but probably within the next week, you'll start seeing a lot of those deer materialize again. The difference is where are they going to materialize? And that's where keeping track of them from year to year really helps, because I have deer that winter and summer over on my neighbor's place, and I'm watching those deer right now, and he's like, yep. He says, I've seen them every night. 4 nights ago, last night he sent me a text, says, I haven't seen those deer in 4 nights. I'm like, okay, that means they're transitioning out of his corn, out of his beans, because he's got a big 40-acre field next to me. Those deer will start materializing again on my plots here within the next 7 to 10 days. They'll start showing on my water sources again, because that's what's happening. Your food sources are changing, and so are their hormones. So don't completely freak out. Yes, freak out on some of them, because if you don't have a history with them, they may disappear 40, 80, 100 acres away or farther. But if you have a history with them, from year to year, now you're going to say, okay, that deer usually moves to the other side of my farm, or that deer moves to here at this time when it rubs that off. So that's what you're truly looking for. And you'll know that again by patterning year to year and how that really works. So great question, though, because I'm hearing that right now is everything under the sun, they're all disappearing on us, and they are. But last week, guys, there was one thing that I forgot that was in my giveaways. And Dennis, you were that one that we'd picked for that, and that is a scrape stick. So I will also get that. But Dennis, if you can go to Facebook and send me your address where to ship that. Other guys, because usually what I do is the first ones that are in here usually are the first ones that end up getting something, because there's guys that I have pop in and out of here all night long, and then they wait until YouTube. You guys usually stick it out real well, so with that, I've got a few things to give away again tonight, and we will see. I'm trying to think. Mike, what did you get last week? Can you type which one you were last week? If you were the scents or the backpack, I couldn't remember for sure. I've got it in my phone, not in front of me right now. So let's see here. I need Dennis, and I need Mike, and let's see, Jason. I need Brian, Jesse. Okay. Let's see here. Do you guys you like these live seminars like this? If you can give me a little bit of feedback too on that. If you like these, want me to continue to do them less frequently, more frequently. If you have anything else that you'd really like to see me cover, let me know, because I don't care if it's one of you that shows up or 200 people show up. It doesn't really matter to me, because you're here to learn something, and it's going to go to my YouTube afterwards. So I'm going to be doing it on these Thursday nights, whether one person shows up or whether 50. So I appreciate it. Shell, can you come here and draw some stuff? I need you want to grab another hat over by the door? We're going to draw these names here and then get you guys kind of moving. All right.
No, your dad's finishing up the seminar.
Yes, Joy, once a week is good. All right.
He's going with yours.
The seminars and sports shows this year. Okay, which did Mike? Did you put in there?
So
What you got last week, or do you remember? Okay, Mike is posting that. Let's see here. Okay, so you got the backpack last week. I don't think you had. I think Jason had the Arctic Shield stuff the week before, I think. So the first one out. Oops. Here we go. Is Jason. Again, Jason. And for you, Jason, I hope you have cell reception up there, because you're the lucky winner of a Moultrie 6000 cell camera. So we're kind of getting everything gathered in boxes to send to everybody. So so that would be for you, Jason. Next one. Dennis, and you have some Arctic Shield stuff coming to you. Some hats, some different things. So some, I'm trying to remember. To be honest, I think I have a seat, Arctic Shield seat to sit on. There's a couple other things in there. It's a really nice little package that we'll put together. And I will also, when I put that in there, I'll put that scrape stick in there for you too. And this one, like I said, you three are usually the first one. So you have Mike, and Mike, I'm not sure if you got one yet, but you've got a scrape stick coming too. If you do, you can always trust me. I've got like 10 of them up, so you get another one of those coming. But yeah, Dennis, if you can send me that so we can get some of your Arctic Shield stuff and your scrape stick together, and then I will get that stuff. Anyway, I appreciate it, guys. And next week, like I said, 5 land management must-haves. And some of them, even if you hunt public land, there's things that you're going to learn from it. So, if you've got any other guys that you know that want to hit the seminars or learn anything, let me know. And again, if there's anything you need refreshers on, check it out on the YouTube page here in a couple weeks. And tomorrow's seminar too, I will be putting that up on there. So again, appreciate it. And I know I'll talk to you next week, but get out there and figure out where those big deer are and get them patterned, because we got 2 weeks, guys. And I really keep my fingers crossed that that one shows back up for Michelle for opening weekend, because that deer I've got a lot of history with. And I've got about 700 pictures of him this summer so far. And he blew up pretty good this year, so he'd be an awesome deer. So see you next week, guys. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Have a great night.